Access Youth. I hope you're having a good week so far. Have you ever woken up and put on your clothes and all of a sudden realized that you had something on backwards? You realized because you had a scratchy tag or something was really uncomfortable or it didn't sit right. Well, maybe it makes me think of those days when we were little and we went to elementary school and we had opposite day. Just a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night, we had a kindergartner show up to ride in our van on Wednesday, and I looked at her clothing, and it was all on backwards. Everything was backwards. Her shirt was backwards, her sweater was buttoned behind her back, her pants were on backwards, and her shoes were on opposite feet. And she said, oh, it was opposite day at school. It was so fun. And I said, aren't you uncomfortable? Like, don't your clothes backwards just make you uncomfortable? And she said, no, I love it. I wish every day was backwards day. I wish every day was opposite day. The older we get, the more I think that we have a lot of expectations about how life ought to work and how it ought to function. Maybe you feel like life is really out of sorts, upside down right now, and I've talked to a lot of you and you're not really loving it because we have expectations and we don't really like it when things are uncomfortable and when they're upside down. But when I think about what Jesus talks about when he talks about following him, I really think that he calls us to a life that's pretty backwards, that's pretty upside down. He literally reverses what his followers think success means. And so I want us to look at three passages really quick today in Mark chapter 8, Mark chapter 9, and Mark chapter 10 that could be sermons all by themselves, each one. But I just want us to look at an overview of what this upside down life that Jesus calls us to looks like. So the first passage is in Mark chapter 8, verse 35, and it says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. And what Jesus is really saying is that he's reversing success, and he's saying instead of success, allegiance to me is really expressed in surrender. When we move on to chapter 9, verse 35, it says, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last, and the servant of all. And really, he says, instead of self-promotion, allegiance is expressed in service to other people. The third passage is in chapter 10, verses 44 and 45. And he says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man, Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And what he's saying is that instead of selfishness, allegiance to him and his kingdom is expressed in humility. Well, Jesus is upending, he's turning over the expected ideas of a kingdom, and they are uncomfortable ideas. They were uncomfortable for his followers, and they're uncomfortable for us, because no one likes it when things get turned backwards, at least not at first, maybe unless you're in kindergarten. Well, this is a kingdom of an entirely different kind, though. So winning looks different, and while he replaces success with surrender and self-promotion with service and selfishness with humility, he's not just talking about a temporary thing. Jesus is talking about a whole new way of living and being that becomes permanent characteristics of his followers. He wants to be recognized on the street because we respond in an unexpected, contrary, totally upside down way that makes people go, that wasn't normal. Like if you get in a car accident and your car gets totaled and you get out and go, you know what, I forgive you, to the person whose fault it is. People are going to go, that's not normal. Because it's not. It's not a normal reaction. But following Jesus means giving away our lives, forgiving when people don't deserve it, sacrificing when it feels like we don't have anything to give, extending grace, particularly to those who don't feel like they deserve it to us, loving extravagantly, and spending ourselves in allegiance to Christ and for the sake of others. That's what Jesus calls us to. He calls us to reversal. So I have a couple questions for you to reflect on today. The first is, how are you responding to these reversals of surrender, service, and humility? Can people see the characteristics or fruit of God's kingdom in your life? Well, if you're like me, you've got some work to do. Because if you're like me, you're human. And we all have work to do in those areas. But that's what fruit looks like. So how do we work on those things? Well, I want to give you an idea of a heart check today. Just like if you were sick and your mom like checked your forehead and told you to say ah and then checked your fever. These are 3 questions that can kind of check your heart and see if your heart is in a good position to be really responding to Jesus. So here's the first question. When was the last time I spent with Jesus? Or is he a daily priority in my life? We can't bear fruit if we're not spending time connected to the vine. Second thing is, when was the last time I reacted selfishly? Now, that could be answered like 5 minutes ago or like 2 minutes ago. But what I really want you to think about when you react selfishly is, when was the last time you paused and said, are my desires in this situation about what I want? And can I pause? And instead of making my own desires known, can I put someone else first? Sometimes that's just listening. Sometimes it's really simple, but can I put someone else first? When was the last time I reacted in a way that put someone else first? And the third thing is, am I submitting my goals and my cares to God daily? Which is really a mental battle of surrender. My goals, my dreams, my desires, my hopes, my worries, my anxieties. Am I submitting those things to God on a daily basis? Because in order to live his kingdom of reversal, in order to live the characteristics of the kingdom he calls us to, we've got to spend time with the King. And while I've talked to a lot of people that seem to think that while they're spending time holed up in their bedrooms, that God can't be doing much, I really believe that this is the best time for us to be doing heart checks. That this is the best time for us to lean into what God has for us. I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's extremely uncomfortable. It's way harder to lean into what Jesus has for us than it is to just turn the next thing on Netflix. But honestly, I believe that God has more for us. He has more for you than what we're experiencing right now. That he wants us to come out of this time where we're holed up and sheltered, living a better kingdom than we were before we went into it. Now, I don't know how we can accomplish that except through us as individuals. It's got to start with you. It's got to start in your bedroom or at your kitchen table or out on your patio, wherever, but it's got to start with you, because I believe God has big and good things for you as you live out his kingdom, as you become more like him little by little every day. I love you guys. I hope to see your faces soon.